The fierce Wyoming wind howled across the dusty streets of Parowan, a struggling settlement nestled in the shadow of the Wind River Range. Bethany Blackwell gripped her market basket with trembling hands as another pain tore through her abdomen, more severe than the last. At 7 months pregnant and alone, she'd made the desperate journey into town despite the threatening storm clouds, needing supplies that couldn't wait another day. The year was 1876, and the unforgiving frontier offered little mercy to a widow expecting her first child. Bethany steadied herself against a wooden post outside Miller's General Store, her face pale beneath the brim of her worn bonnet. She'd lost her husband Thomas 3 months prior to a bullet fired during a dispute over water rights. Now, with winter approaching, she struggled to maintain their small homestead just outside of town. "Just a few more items," she whispered to herself, forcing her feet to move toward the vegetable stand. The scent of fresh produce mingled with the earthy smell of approaching rain as she carefully selected potatoes and carrots, counting the precious coins in her palm. Zachary Thornton watched the pregnant woman from across the street, his keen eyes noticing her unsteady movements. He'd been in Parowan only a week, taking odd jobs while deciding whether to continue west or settle for a spell. At 32, he'd spent the last decade drifting after the war, working cattle drives, breaking horses, and occasionally serving as hired protection for settlers. The lean, broad-shouldered cowboy adjusted his worn Stetson as he observed Bethany reach for an apple, her fingers trembling visibly even from his distance. Lightning cracked across the sky, followed immediately by a deafening boom of thunder. The market square erupted in activity as vendors scrambled to protect their wares. Bethany gasped, startled by the sudden noise, and Zachary saw her grip the edge of the produce stand, her knuckles white with strain. "Madam, are you all right?" called the vendor, an elderly man with kind eyes. Bethany opened her mouth to respond, but instead, her face contorted in pain. Her basket dropped to the ground, vegetables rolling across the muddy street as her knees buckled. She would have collapsed completely if not for the swift movement of the tall cowboy who seemed to appear from nowhere, catching her before she hit the ground. "I've got you, madam," Zachary said, his voice steady despite the alarm he felt at her pallor. Her skin was clammy beneath his calloused hands. "My baby," she whispered, her blue eyes wide with fear as she clutched her swollen belly. "Something's wrong." Rain began to fall in earnest, fat droplets quickly becoming a deluge. Zachary made a split-second decision, lifting the small woman into his arms with ease. "Where's your home?" he asked, sheltering her as best he could with his body. "North. Homestead," she managed through clenched teeth. 3 miles, Blackwell Place." Zachary's jaw tightened. 3 miles in this storm with a woman in distress was far from ideal. "Is there a doctor in town?" he asked a bystander who had rushed to help collect Bethany's fallen goods. "Doc Simmons left for Cheyenne yesterday. Won't be back for a week," the man replied, shaking his head. "Mrs. Peterson's the midwife, but she's out at the Carson place with another birthing." Bethany moaned softly, her head lolling against Zachary's shoulder. "Please," she whispered, "I need to get home." Zachary nodded decisively. "I'll get you there, madam." He turned to the concerned shopkeeper. "Can you point me to the livery? My horse is there." Within minutes, Zachary had mounted his sturdy buckskin gelding, carefully positioning Bethany in front of him. She leaned back against his chest, her breathing shallow as he wrapped his duster around her to shield her from the worsening storm. Thunder rumbled continuously overhead as they rode out of town, the rain reducing visibility to mere feet ahead. "Hold on, Mrs. Blackwell," Zachary urged, feeling her shiver against him. "I've got you safe." The journey that should have taken less than an hour stretched painfully as they navigated the slick, muddy trail. Zachary followed Bethany's weakening directions, relief washing over him when a small cabin finally came into view, smoke still curling from its chimney. By the time he carried her through the door, Bethany was barely conscious. The cabin was modest but tidy, with a fire burning low in the hearth. Zachary gently laid her on the narrow bed in the corner and quickly stoked the fire, bringing warmth to the single room. "Mrs. Blackwell, Bethany," he called, touching her face gently. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion evident until another spasm of pain made her cry out. "Tell me what to do," he urged. "Water," she gasped. "Boil water. And there's clean cloths in the trunk." Zachary moved with efficiency born of years spent fending for himself. He found the water bucket, filled a pot, and set it over the fire. As he searched for the cloths, his eyes took in the sparse cabin, the carefully mended curtains, the single chair pulled close to the fire, a man's hat hanging on a peg by the door. A widow's home with evidence of her determination to survive alone. Outside, the storm raged, cutting them off from any possible help. Zachary had assisted with countless animal births on ranches, but never a human one. Still, the woman needed him, and he wouldn't fail her. "The baby's not due yet," Bethany said when he returned to her side with a damp cloth. 2 months early. Tears leaked from her eyes. "I can't lose this baby, it's all I have left of Thomas." Zachary gently wiped her brow. "We'll do everything we can, madam, I promise you that." As the night progressed, Bethany's condition stabilized somewhat. The pains came less frequently, and Zachary realized with relief that she wasn't in labor after all. Still, something was wrong, and they both knew it. "I think it's the strain," she admitted as midnight approached. "Trying to run the homestead alone. The doctor in town warned me to rest more, but—" She gestured helplessly at their surroundings. "No one to do the work if you don't," Zachary finished for her, understanding all too well the cruel realities of frontier life. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape of mud and fallen branches. Bethany's color had improved, though she remained weak. Zachary, having kept vigil through the night, stepped outside to tend to his horse and assess the damage to her small farm. The chicken coop had partially collapsed, and her vegetable garden was a mess of flattened plants and debris. The lean-to that served as a barn for her single milk cow had held, but just barely. Without thinking twice, Zachary set to work, repairing what he could and feeding the anxious animals. When he returned to the cabin, Bethany was sitting up in bed, her golden hair loose around her shoulders, making her appear even younger than he'd first thought, perhaps no more than 22 or 23. "You've been working on my place," she said, surprise evident in her voice. Zachary removed his hat, suddenly aware of his muddy boots and disheveled appearance. "Hope you don't mind, madam. Seemed like things needed tending." "I'm grateful," she said softly, "and please call me Bethany. After carrying me through a storm, I think we can dispense with formalities, Mr. Thornton, Zachary Thornton, but most folks just call me Zach." A small smile touched her lips. "Thank you, Zach, for everything. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there." "Just happened to be in the right place," he said, uncomfortable with gratitude. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Better," she admitted, "but still not right. The baby's moving, which is a blessing, but I'm afraid I'm still too weak to be up and about." Zachary nodded, making a decision. "Then I'll stay on a while if that's acceptable, just until you're back on your feet." Bethany's eyes widened. "I couldn't impose. You must have places to be, and I have no way to pay you properly." "I've nowhere pressing to be," he said honestly, "and payment isn't necessary. Consider it a neighborly duty." "We're not neighbors," she pointed out. A slight smile crossed his weathered face. "Maybe not yet, but for now, I'm the closest thing you've got." Over the next few days, a routine developed. Zachary slept on a bedroll near the door, rose with the sun to tend to the animals and work on the much-needed repairs to the homestead, while Bethany slowly regained her strength. She directed him from her bed at first, then from the single chair by the fire, explaining what needed to be done for the coming winter. On the fourth day, Zachary hitched her wagon and made the trip into Parowan for the supplies she'd been unable to purchase when she collapsed. The townsfolk regarded him with curiosity and some suspicion. "You still out at the Blackwell place?" asked the shopkeeper as he filled Zachary's order. "Yes, sir. Mrs. Blackwell's recovering but needs a hand until she's back on her feet." The older man nodded slowly. Thomas Blackwell was a good man. Damn shame what happened to him. Folks worried about his widow out there alone, especially with the baby coming. "She's stronger than she looks," Zachary said, surprising himself with the touch of admiration in his voice. Had to be, to follow Thomas out here from Boston. She was a schoolteacher back east, you know, not born to this life but learning fast. The shopkeeper leaned forward. Some men in town had their eye on her even before Thomas was cold in the ground. "Widow with a decent piece of land is a rarity out here." Zachary felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness. "She's still grieving. Course she is. Just saying, if you've got honorable intentions, you might not be the only one." Zachary's face remained impassive. "Just helping a neighbor in need, nothing more." But as he drove the wagon back to the homestead, he found himself thinking about Bethany in ways that surprised him. He'd avoided entanglements with women for years, preferring the freedom of the open trail. Yet something about the quiet dignity with which Bethany faced her circumstances touched him deeply. A week after the storm, Bethany was well enough to move around the cabin and even venture outside for short periods. Dr. Simmons returned to town and made the trip to examine her, pronouncing that both mother and child appeared healthy, but warning her again about overexertion. "You need someone to help you through the winter, Mrs. Blackwell," the doctor said bluntly as he packed his bag. "At least until after the baby comes. This homestead's too much for a woman in your condition." "I've been managing," Bethany began. "Until you collapsed in the middle of town," the doctor countered. "You're fortunate Mr. Thornton was there and willing to assist. If you've no family to call upon, perhaps consider hiring help or—" He hesitated, "or remarrying. A woman alone out here, especially with a child coming, faces difficult odds." After the doctor left, an uncomfortable silence filled the cabin. Zachary busied himself chopping more firewood, giving Bethany privacy with her thoughts. That evening, as they sat across from each other at the small table, Bethany finally spoke about her husband. "Thomas had such dreams for this place," she said, her gaze fixed on the flame of the oil lamp. "We met when I came west to teach school in Cheyenne. I was 20, fresh from Boston, and he was working as a surveyor. He talked about the land with such passion, how with enough work and love it could sustain a family for generations." She touched her wedding band, twisting it absently. "We were married just over a year when we claimed this homestead. It was harder than I imagined, but Thomas never lost faith. Even when the first crops failed, even when the winter nearly broke us." Her voice caught. "He died believing in this place. I can't abandon it now." Zachary watched her face in the lamplight, seeing the determination beneath her gentle features. "What happened to him?" he asked quietly. "If you don't mind me asking," Bethany sighed. "There was a dispute with some cattle ranchers moving through. They wanted to graze their herds on our land and access our creek. Thomas refused. We needed every bit of water for our own crops. Words were exchanged, then shots." She closed her eyes briefly. By the time I reached him, he was already gone. Did they catch who did it? She shook her head. The ranchers claimed it was self-defense, that Thomas drew first. No witnesses besides their own men. The sheriff in Parowan said there wasn't enough evidence to pursue it. Zachary's jaw tightened. He'd seen similar injustices throughout the territories, where a settler's life often counted for less than a cattle baron's convenience. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "So am I." She placed a protective hand over her belly. "But this baby deserves the chance to grow up on the land his father loved. I have to make that possible somehow." The following weeks brought the first dusting of snow and increasingly cold nights. Zachary remained at the homestead, his temporary stay extending without formal discussion. He built up the lean-to into a proper small barn, repaired the roof of the cabin, and dug a new root cellar for winter storage. Each improvement felt like a silent promise to the determined woman whose quiet courage impressed him more each day. For her part, Bethany found herself looking forward to their evening conversations. Zachary was unlike any man she'd known, reserved yet thoughtful, with a dry humor that occasionally broke through his serious demeanor. He spoke little of his past, though she gathered he'd fought for the Union, drifted extensively since, and had no living family. "Why Parowan?" she asked one evening as they shelled peas from the recovered garden. Of all places to drift to, Zachary considered his answer. "Heard there might be work breaking horses at the Wilson place south of town. Then I saw you in the market." Bethany felt warmth spread through her chest at the simple statement. "And you decided to become my guardian angel instead." The corner of his mouth lifted in a half-smile. "Nothing so grand. Just couldn't leave a lady in distress. Yet you're still here, long past the immediate crisis." Their eyes met across the table, and something unspoken passed between them. Zachary looked away first, uncomfortable with the feeling taking root in his chest. "The Wilson Ranch will still need horse breakers come spring," he said finally. "And you'll need help until then." Bethany nodded, recognizing the practical arrangement being proposed. "A fair trade, then. Shelter through winter for your labor." "If that suits you," he agreed, relieved at her understanding. But that night, lying in her bed listening to Zachary's steady breathing from his bedroll across the room, Bethany acknowledged to herself that her feelings for the quiet cowboy had grown into something far more complicated than gratitude. The realization brought guilt. Thomas not even a year in his grave, but also a fluttering hope she hadn't expected to feel again. As her pregnancy advanced, Bethany found herself increasingly dependent on Zachary's help. The baby grew active, kicking vigorously, especially in the evenings when she sat by the fire. One night she gasped at a particularly strong movement. "Something wrong?" Zachary asked, immediately alert. Bethany shook her head, smiling. "Just a very enthusiastic kick. Here." Without thinking, she reached for his hand and placed it on her belly. Zachary froze at the intimate contact, but then his eyes widened as he felt the strong push against his palm. Something profound shifted in his expression, wonder mixed with a protective tenderness that caught Bethany's breath. "That's quite a fighter you've got there," he said softly, his hand lingering. "Yes," she whispered. "Just like his father." Zachary withdrew his hand slowly, and Bethany immediately missed the warmth of his touch. "You think it's a boy?" he asked. "Thomas was convinced it would be. He had the name picked out before we even knew I was expecting Samuel, after his grandfather." Zachary nodded. "A good, strong name." The first major snowstorm hit in mid-November, bringing howling winds that rattled the windows and drifts that nearly reached the cabin's eaves. For 3 days, they were completely isolated, venturing out only to tend to the animals in the barn. The enforced proximity brought both comfort and tension, as their awareness of each other grew increasingly difficult to ignore. On the fourth morning, Zachary broke through the snow to check their surroundings, returning with a troubling report. "We're nearly out of firewood. I'll need to cut more today." Bethany frowned. "In this cold, can't it wait until tomorrow?" "If another storm comes through, we could be in trouble. Best not to take chances." She watched with concern as he bundled up and headed out with the axe. Through the frosted window, she could see him working tirelessly, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air as he chopped log after log. By midday, her worry had grown when he didn't return for the meal she'd prepared. Wrapping herself in her heaviest shawl, Bethany made her way carefully through the packed snow path to the edge of their property, where Zachary had been cutting trees from a small stand of pines. She found him leaning against a half-cut trunk, his face alarmingly pale. "Zach, what's wrong?" He straightened at her voice, trying to hide a wince. "Nothing, just taking a break." But Bethany had already spotted the dark stain on his left sleeve. "You're hurt." "Why didn't you come back to the cabin? It's just a nick." The axe glanced off a knot in the wood. He attempted a reassuring smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Didn't want to worry you." "Let me see," she demanded, her tone brooking no argument. Reluctantly, he allowed her to examine his arm. The nick was a deep gash that had soaked his sleeve with blood. Bethany gasped. "This needs stitching right away. Come back to the cabin where I can tend it properly. The wood will still be here tomorrow. You're no good to either of us if you bleed to death from stubbornness." In the warmth of the cabin, Bethany efficiently cleaned the wound while Zachary sat stoically at the table. She threaded a needle she'd sterilized in the fire's flame and looked up apologetically. "This will hurt." "Go ahead," he said, his jaw set. "I've had worse." As she worked, Bethany's gentle touch and concerned expression affected Zachary more deeply than the pain. When was the last time anyone had cared for him this way? Had anyone ever? "You're good at this," he commented as she tied off the last neat stitch. "I've had practice." Teaching school in frontier towns means tending to all manner of scrapes and injuries. She began wrapping clean bandaging around his arm. "Thomas always said I should have been a doctor rather than a teacher." He was right. You have a healing touch. Their eyes met, and Bethany felt heat rise to her cheeks at the open admiration in his gaze. Her hand stilled on his arm. "Zachary," she began hesitantly. A sharp knock at the door broke the moment. They both looked up. Startled visitors were rare in good weather, nearly unheard of after a heavy snow. Zachary rose, his right hand instinctively checking the revolver at his hip before opening the door. A tall man with an expensive fur coat stood on their threshold, flanked by two hard-faced cowboys on horseback. "Mrs. Blackwell home?" the man asked without preamble. "Who's asking?" Zachary responded, his posture subtly shifting to block the entrance. "Edward Caldwell." The name hung in the air like a challenge. "I own the Bar C Ranch, and you would be—" "Zachary Thornton." Behind him, Bethany moved forward. "Mr. Caldwell, this is unexpected." The rancher's eyes narrowed at the sight of her advanced pregnancy. "Mrs. Blackwell." "I was in the area and thought to pay my respects. I hadn't heard you had company." Bethany lifted her chin. "Mr. Thornton has been kind enough to help me maintain the homestead through winter." "I see." Caldwell's calculating gaze moved between them. "May I come in?" "It's bitter cold to conduct business on your doorstep." Zachary glanced at Bethany, who nodded reluctantly. They stepped aside, allowing the rancher entry. His men remained outside, their presence a silent threat. Once inside, Caldwell removed his gloves but not his hat, surveying the cabin with poorly disguised disdain. "I'll come straight to the point, Mrs. Blackwell. I've come to renew my offer to purchase your land, given your—" His eyes dropped to her belly. Circumstances, I'm prepared to be generous. $500 more than fair for a property this size. Bethany's expression hardened. My answer remains the same as when you approached Thomas. This land is not for sale. Caldwell sighed as if dealing with a petulant child. Mrs. Blackwell, be reasonable. Winter has barely begun. How do you expect to survive out here alone with a newborn once your helper moves on? Zachary stepped forward. She's not alone. The rancher's eyebrow lifted. Indeed, you planning to homestead here, Thornton? Because last I heard, claiming another man's widow along with his property requires certain formalities. Mr. Caldwell, Bethany gasped, her face flushing with anger. Forgive my bluntness, madam, but facts are facts. You need that baby to have a name, and this place needs a man's hand. If not mine through fair purchase, then. He glanced dismissively at Zachary. Whatever arrangement you've made here. Zachary's hand drifted toward his gun. I think you should leave. Or what, Drifter? You'll shoot me like Thomas did my foreman. Caldwell's smile was cold. Oh yes, your husband drew first, Mrs. Blackwell, whatever you may have been told. Jason was just defending himself. Bethany paled. That's not true. Thomas never even wore a gun. Convenient that the only other witnesses were my men, isn't it? Caldwell shrugged. The sheriff believed our account. Would be a shame if another misunderstanding happened here. The threat hung in the air. Zachary's voice was dangerously quiet when he spoke. You threatening a pregnant woman, Caldwell? The rancher held up his hands. Just stating facts. This territory's no place for a woman alone. Accidents happen. Properties change hands. He reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope. My offer stands until the first of the year. After that, who knows what this place will be worth? He placed the envelope on the table and moved toward the door. Think about your child, Mrs. Blackwell. $500 could give you both a fresh start somewhere safer. With a final nod, he stepped outside and mounted the horse his men had brought forward. As soon as they were gone, Bethany sagged into a chair, her face ashen. So it was Caldwell's men who killed Thomas. I always suspected, but... Zachary closed the door firmly and crouched beside her. Bethany, look at me. Did Thomas really not have a gun that day? She shook her head firmly. Never. He believed in settling disputes with words, not bullets. He wasn't wearing a weapon when I found him. Her hands trembled. The sheriff didn't want to investigate further. Said it would be my word against Caldwell's men, and Caldwell practically owns the town. Zachary's expression darkened. And now he's threatening you to get your land. He's wanted this property since we claimed it. The creek that runs through our north field is the only year-round water source for miles. Thomas refused to sell or grant access rights. She placed protective hands over her belly. What am I going to do, Zach? I can't fight a man like Caldwell. Zachary took her hands in his resolve hardening. You're not alone in this, Bethany. I meant what I said. I'm not going anywhere. The weeks following Caldwell's visit were marked by increasing tension. Twice, Zachary spotted riders watching the homestead from a distance. He began carrying his Winchester when working outside and kept the doors barred at night. Bethany tried to maintain her routines, but the stress took its toll. As December progressed, she tired more easily and occasionally experienced concerning pains. Maybe we should go into town, have the doctor check you again, Zachary suggested after finding her rubbing her back by the fire, her face pinched with discomfort. The trails are barely passable, she objected. And I don't trust leaving the homestead unattended, not with Caldwell's men watching. Zachary ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. Your health comes first, the baby's safety. Bethany smiled tiredly. Since when did a drifting cowboy get so invested in a widow and her unborn child? He knelt beside her chair, taking her hand. Bethany, I need to tell you something about who I was before I came here. She waited, her blue eyes intent on his face. After the war, I drifted, took whatever work I could find. Sometimes that meant riding with men like Caldwell, enforcing their will, intimidating homesteaders, doing things I'm not proud of. He looked down at their joined hands. I never killed in cold blood, but I stood by while others did. Told myself I was just following orders, earning my pay. What changed? She asked softly. About 3 years ago in Montana, I was working for a cattle baron trying to drive out settlers. There was a family husband, wife, 2 small children. The baron wanted their water rights. He paused, the memory still raw. The husband refused to sell. We were ordered to convince him. Bethany squeezed his hand, encouraging him to continue. The other men went too far. Set fire to their barn while the family was inside. I managed to get the woman and children out, but the husband, he went back for their horse. Zachary's voice roughened. I can still hear their screams. Oh, Zach, Bethany whispered. I left that night. Broke my contract, risked them coming after me. Been drifting ever since, trying to atone, I suppose, taking honest work where I could find it. He finally looked up, his eyes troubled. When I saw you collapse in the market, something in me recognized a chance to make things right. To protect instead of threaten. Bethany reached out, touching his cheek gently. You're not that man anymore. No, he agreed, turning his face slightly into her palm. But Caldwell is exactly the type I used to work for. I know how they think, what they're capable of. That's why I'm worried, Bethany. He won't stop at threats. The moment stretched between them, weighted with unspoken feelings. Finally, Bethany spoke, her voice barely audible. I'm afraid all the time now, not just of Caldwell, but of losing this place, of raising my child alone, of. She hesitated, of these feelings I shouldn't have so soon after Thomas. Zachary's heart pounded. What feelings? Before she could answer, a sharp pain made her gasp and double over. Zach, she panted, clutching her belly. Something's wrong. The baby, her words cut off as water gushed onto the floor beneath her chair. Her eyes widened in panic. It's too early. Over a month too early. Zachary moved swiftly, lifting her and carrying her to the bed. The baby's coming now, he said, trying to keep his voice calm despite his own fear. I'll ride for the midwife. No, Bethany clutched his arm. Don't leave me. The storm's getting worse and it's near dark. You might not make it back in time. Another contraction seized her, stronger than the last. Please stay with me. Torn between the need to get help and her desperate plea, Zachary made his decision. I'm here. I'll help you through this. The labor progressed with frightening speed. Bethany's body, perhaps stressed by weeks of worry, seemed determined to bring forth her child despite its early timing. Zachary boiled water, gathered clean cloths, and tried to remember everything he'd ever heard about birthing. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing as night fell completely. Inside, Bethany's cries echoed through the small cabin as the contractions came closer together. Zachary held her hand, wiped her brow, and murmured encouragement, feeling utterly inadequate in the face of her suffering. Talk to me, she gasped between contractions. Distract me. Tell me where you're from, your family. Grateful for direction, Zachary began speaking as he dampened another cloth for her forehead. Born in Pennsylvania. Father was a blacksmith, mother died when I was young. Had a brother, lost him at Gettysburg. The simple facts of his life spilled out, giving her something to focus on besides the pain. Always had a way with horses, dreamed of having my own ranch someday before the war changed everything. Another contraction hit, stronger than before. Bethany cried out, gripping his hand with surprising strength. When it passed, she panted, I think it's time. I need to push. Zachary swallowed hard and moved to the end of the bed. I'm right here. You can do this, Bethany." What followed was the most terrifying and miraculous experience of Zachary's life. Despite her exhaustion and the early timing, Bethany found remarkable strength, bearing down with each contraction as nature took its course. Zachary remained steady, his calm voice belying the fear in his heart as he prepared to catch the new life entering the world. With a final, powerful effort from Bethany, the baby slid into Zachary's waiting hands, tiny, slick, and perfect. For one heart-stopping moment, there was silence. Then the infant gave an indignant cry, strong and vital. "A boy," Zachary announced, his voice thick with emotion. "You have a son, Bethany." Tears streamed down Bethany's face as Zachary quickly cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in her eager arms. Despite his early arrival, little Samuel Thomas Blackwell appeared healthy, with a shock of dark hair and his mother's blue eyes when he briefly opened them. "He's beautiful," Zachary whispered, watching in awe as Bethany counted tiny fingers and toes. "Thank you," she said, looking up at him with an expression that squeezed his heart. "For everything. For being here." Zachary nodded, suddenly overcome. He busied himself cleaning up, giving Bethany privacy as she nursed her son for the first time. The storm outside seemed to have quieted, as if nature itself was acknowledging the miracle that had occurred within the humble cabin. Later, with mother and child resting peacefully, Zachary stepped outside to check on the animals. The night was crystalline cold, stars brilliant above fresh snow. He stood for a long moment, overwhelmed by the events of the night and the feelings he could no longer deny. He was in love with Bethany Blackwell. Had been, perhaps, since the moment he carried her through the storm. And her child, Thomas's child, already had a grip on his heart that felt unbreakable. But what right did he have to these feelings? He, a drifter with a troubled past. She, a new mother and recent widow with a legal battle looming. The timing couldn't be worse, the circumstances more complicated. When he returned inside, Bethany was awake, watching him with knowing eyes as she cradled her sleeping son. "You're thinking of leaving," she said quietly. Zachary removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "It might be best for you, for Samuel. Why, Caldwell will be back. When he learns of the birth, he'll press harder. Having me here complicates things." Bethany's chin lifted with familiar determination. "Or protects us. You said yourself he won't stop at threats. If you go, we're more vulnerable, not less." "Bethany," he began, then faltered. "I don't know if I can be what you and Samuel need." "And what is that exactly?" He gestured helplessly. "A proper guardian, someone without my history." "What we need," she said deliberately, "is someone who cares for us. Someone brave enough to stay even when it's difficult." Her voice softened. "Someone I've grown to love." Zachary's head snapped up, hope and disbelief warring in his expression. "Yes," she confirmed, answering his unspoken question. "I love you, Zachary Thornton." I didn't expect it or seek it, and yes, it came sooner after Thomas than I ever imagined possible. But it's true all the same. He crossed the room in 2 strides, kneeling beside the bed. "I love you too," he admitted, the words both terrifying and liberating. "But Bethany, I have nothing to offer you but myself. That's all I'm asking for." She shifted Samuel to one arm and reached for Zachary's hand with the other. "Stay, not just for the winter. Stay and help me fight for this land, raise this child, build a life." Outside, dawn was breaking, pale light filtering through the frosted windows. The beginning of a new day, a new life. "Yes," Zachary said simply, his heart too full for elaborate declarations. He leaned forward, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead, then to Samuel's downy head. A promise. A beginning. The weeks following Samuel's birth were both joyous and demanding. The baby, though small, thrived under his mother's devoted care and Zachary's protective watch. As Christmas approached, the homestead settled into a peaceful routine despite the looming threat of Caldwell's deadline. On Christmas Eve, while Bethany nursed Samuel by the fire, Zachary presented her with two surprises: a small carved wooden horse for the baby and a document he'd had drawn up in town. "What's this?" she asked, taking the official-looking paper. "A marriage license," he said, his expression nervous but determined. "Blank, waiting for our names if you'll have me." Bethany's eyes filled with tears. "Zach, I know it's soon," he hurried on. "And I'm not asking because of Caldwell or the land or even Samuel, though they're part of it. I'm asking because I love you and I want to build a life with you if you'll give me that chance." She reached for his hand, drawing him down beside her. "Yes," she whispered. "1,000 times yes." They were married on New Year's Day, 1877, in the Parowan church, with baby Samuel bundled warmly against the winter cold. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, attended by the few townspeople who had shown kindness to Bethany during her struggles. The sheriff was noticeably absent, as were any of Caldwell's men. That evening, as they returned to the homestead as husband and wife, Zachary carried Bethany over the threshold just as he had carried her that first fateful day. But this time, her arms wrapped willingly around his neck, and her lips met his in a kiss filled with promise. Caldwell made his move 3 days later. Zachary spotted the riders approaching just after dawn, 6 men, Caldwell in the lead. He quickly woke Bethany. "Take Samuel to the root cellar," he instructed, checking his revolver. "Stay there until I come for you." "Zach, please," he cut her off with a quick kiss. "I need to know you're both safe." Reluctantly, she gathered the sleeping baby in a blanket. Disappearing through the trapdoor Zachary had installed in the cabin floor, leading to the root cellar below. Zachary stepped onto the porch as the riders approached, rifle in hand but not raised. "That's far enough, Caldwell." The rancher reined his horse to a stop, studying the cabin with narrowed eyes. "Thornton, heard you and the widow made things official. Congratulations." The word dripped with sarcasm. "What do you want? Your deadline's passed." "Indeed it has." Caldwell nodded to one of his men who tossed a document onto the snow. "That's an eviction notice signed by Judge Harmon. This property is now legally mine." Zachary didn't move to retrieve the paper. "On what grounds?" "Unpaid taxes." Seems Thomas Blackwell was behind on his territorial assessments. "As a concerned citizen, I've paid them myself in exchange for title." "That's a lie," Zachary said flatly. "Bethany has the tax receipts." Caldwell shrugged. "Judge says otherwise." "You've got until sundown to clear out or my men will assist you." He smiled thinly. "Of course, accidents happen during evictions, especially when the occupants resist." The threat was unmistakable. Zachary's finger twitched near the trigger of his rifle. He could take Caldwell now, end this. But the rancher's men were spread out, hands near their weapons. A firefight would endanger Bethany and Samuel. "We'll see you in court, Caldwell," he said instead. "Now get off our land." The rancher laughed. "Court? In Parowan? Who do you think owns the judge, the sheriff, most of the businesses?" His expression hardened. "Sundown, Thornton. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." With a nod to his men, he wheeled his horse and rode back toward town. As soon as they were out of sight, Zachary hurried to the root cellar, helping Bethany and Samuel back into the cabin. He explained Caldwell's claim as he gathered weapons and supplies. "It's not true about the taxes," Bethany insisted, clutching Samuel to her chest. "Thomas was meticulous about such things. The receipts are in his strongbox." She moved to the trunk at the foot of their bed, pulling out a small metal box and unlocking it with a key she wore on a chain around her neck. Inside were various documents: their marriage certificate, the deed to the homestead, and several tax receipts, the most recent dated just a month before Thomas's death. "This proves he's lying," Zachary said, examining the papers. "But Caldwell's right about one thing: we won't get justice in Parowan, not with his influence." "What do we do?" Bethany asked, fear evident in her voice. Zachary thought quickly. "We need to reach the territorial judge in Cheyenne. He outranks the local court. With these receipts and witnesses to Caldwell's threats, we might have a chance." He began gathering essentials. "We leave now. Take only what we need for the journey. Leave. But our home will still be here to reclaim if we win. But if we stay, Caldwell's men will come at sundown, and I can't protect you both against 6 armed men." Understanding the gravity of the situation, Bethany moved swiftly, packing clothes for herself and Samuel while Zachary gathered food and ammunition. Within an hour they were ready, the wagon loaded with their most precious possessions. Samuel wrapped warmly against his mother's chest, the homestead secured as best they could manage. "I'll lead the horse," Zachary said, helping Bethany into the wagon. "We'll take the old trapper's trail east. It's longer to Cheyenne, but less likely Caldwell's men will look for us that way." The journey was arduous. Winter in Wyoming territory was unforgiving, with bitter winds and treacherous trails. They traveled by day when possible, seeking shelter in abandoned cabins or makeshift camps at night. Samuel, remarkably, endured the difficult journey with few complaints, sleeping against his mother's warmth and nursing whenever they stopped. On the 4th day, as they navigated a particularly narrow pass, Bethany spotted riders behind them. "Zach," she called, pointing back along their trail. "3 men coming fast." Zachary cursed under his breath. "Caldwell must have guessed our plan." He scanned the terrain ahead. There was no place to hide the wagon, and the trail was too narrow to turn around. "Take the reins," he instructed, handing them to Bethany. "Keep going. Don't stop no matter what you hear." "What are you going to do?" she asked, eyes wide with fear. He checked his rifle, then leaned in to kiss her fiercely. "Buying you time. Get to the territorial office in Cheyenne. Ask for Judge Wilson. I saved his son from drowning once. He'll remember me. Show him the tax receipts." He touched Samuel's cheek gently. "Go, Bethany, now." Before she could protest, he slapped the horse's rump, sending the wagon lurching forward. Then he moved back down the trail, finding position behind a large boulder where the path narrowed further. It wasn't an ideal spot for an ambush, but it would have to do. The riders approached cautiously, clearly aware they were being watched. Zachary recognized 2 of them as Caldwell's regular hands. The third was the foreman, Jason, the man who had allegedly shot Thomas in self-defense. "That's far enough," Zachary called when they were within range. "Turn back now and no one gets hurt." The men pulled up, exchanging glances. Jason spoke, his voice carrying in the cold air. "We just want the woman and the papers she's carrying, Thornton. You can ride free." "Not happening." Zachary kept his rifle steady. "Go back to Caldwell. Tell him we'll see him in court." Jason laughed. "There won't be any court, not after we're done here." The first shot came without warning, not at Zachary but at the cliff above him. Rocks cascaded down, forcing him to dive from his position. The men charged forward, guns blazing. Zachary rolled behind a fallen tree, returning fire. His first shot caught one rider in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle with a cry of pain. The other 2 split up, trying to flank him. Zachary focused on Jason, knowing the foreman was the greater threat. A bullet splintered wood near his head as he took careful aim and fired. Jason jerked backward but didn't fall, his horse rearing in panic. The third man used the distraction to circle behind Zachary, emerging from the brush with his pistol raised. Zachary sensed rather than saw the movement, spinning to face the new threat. 2 shots rang out simultaneously. Zachary felt a burning across his side as the man crumpled to the ground, a look of surprise on his face. Jason, wounded but still mounted, wheeled his horse and galloped back the way they'd come, abandoning his fallen companions. Zachary pressed a hand to his side, feeling the warm wetness of blood. The bullet had grazed him, painful but not life-threatening. After ensuring the remaining man was truly dead and securing the wounded one with rope from his saddle, Zachary mounted the abandoned horse and rode hard to catch up with Bethany. He found her several miles ahead, the wagon halted at a fork in the trail, her face pale with worry. "Zach," she cried, scrambling down when she saw him. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he assured her, dismounting carefully. "Just a scratch, but we need to keep moving. One got away, he'll bring back more men." Together they traveled through the night, pushing their exhausted horse to its limits. By dawn, they reached a small settlement where Zachary knew the station master of the newly constructed railroad line. The man, recognizing the urgency of their situation, arranged passage for them on the next train to Cheyenne. "What about our wagon, our things?" Bethany worried as they prepared to board. "Lewis will hide them." Zachary nodded toward the station master. "We'll retrieve everything once this is settled. All that matters now are the tax receipts and getting you and Samuel to safety." The train journey to Cheyenne took a full day. Bethany tended to Zachary's wound in the privacy of their compartment while Samuel slept peacefully, unaware of the drama surrounding his young life. By the time they arrived in Cheyenne, Zachary was feverish, the grays having become infected despite Bethany's care. Still, he insisted on accompanying her to the territorial offices, supporting himself against her as they made their way through the busy streets of the capital. The clerk at the Justice Building initially refused them entry to the judge's chambers, but Zachary's mention of saving young Robert Wilson brought swift results. Judge Wilson, a tall man with a silver beard and piercing eyes, listened to their story with growing concern, examining the tax receipts with particular attention. "This is a clear case of fraud and attempted theft," he pronounced. "And if what you say about the threats is true, Mr. Caldwell could face serious criminal charges." He leaned back in his chair, studying them. "But I'll need more than just your word against his." "The shopkeeper in Parowan," Bethany suggested. "He witnessed Caldwell threatening me the day Thomas died. And Lewis at the rail station can testify about Caldwell's men pursuing us," Zachary added, his voice weakening as he struggled to remain upright. Judge Wilson nodded thoughtfully, then noticed Zachary's pallor. "Mr. Thornton, you're in no condition for this discussion. You need a doctor." He rang a bell on his desk, summoning an assistant. "Take these folks to Dr. Miller, tell him it's urgent, and arrange rooms for them at the hotel across the street." "But the case," Zachary began. "Will still be here after you've received proper care," the judge interrupted firmly. "I'll dispatch federal marshals to Parowan today to begin the investigation. For now, your priority is recovery." The next 3 days passed in a blur for Zachary as fever gripped him. Bethany rarely left his side, caring for both her husband and infant son with quiet determination. On the 4th morning, he woke clear-headed for the first time, finding Bethany asleep in a chair beside his bed, Samuel cradled in her arms. "Bethany," he whispered, reaching out to touch her hand. She startled awake, relief flooding her face. "Zach, the fever's broken." She leaned forward, pressing her free hand to his forehead. "You had me so worried." "Samuel," he asked, his voice raspy. "Is perfect," she assured him, shifting to show him the sleeping infant. "And there's news." Judge Wilson sent word the marshals arrested Caldwell yesterday. They found letters proving he bribed the local judge and threatened witnesses after Thomas's death. Zachary closed his eyes briefly, overwhelmed with relief. And our homestead, safe. The judge has issued an order protecting our property rights. Her eyes shone with unshed tears. We can go home, Zach, as soon as you're well enough to travel. 2 weeks later, they made the return journey to Parowan, this time by train and then by wagon provided by Judge Wilson himself. As they approached their homestead, Bethany gasped in dismay. The cabin showed signs of being ransacked, windows broken, door hanging from its hinges. Caldwell's men, Zachary growled, helping her down from the wagon, taking revenge before the marshals caught up to them. But as they surveyed the damage, a surprising figure emerged from the barn, Mrs. Peterson, the midwife who had been absent during Samuel's birth. "Thought I heard a wagon," the older woman said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Been keeping an eye on the place since word came about Caldwell's arrest. Got a few of the town men to help me chase off his remaining hands when they came to make trouble." Bethany embraced her gratefully. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. We feared much worse. Whole town's talking about how you two stood up to Caldwell," the midwife continued as they walked toward the cabin. "Changed some minds around here, especially when the marshal found evidence Caldwell was behind your husband's death all along, Mrs. Thornton, or should I say Mrs. Blackwell?" "Thornton," Bethany said firmly, taking Zachary's hand. "I'm Mrs. Thornton now." Mrs. Peterson nodded approvingly. "Well, you've got visitors waiting to welcome you home, folks who want to make amends for not standing with you sooner." Inside the cabin, they found the damage less severe than it had appeared from outside. More surprisingly, several townspeople were already at work making repairs. The shopkeeper who had helped Bethany the day she collapsed, the blacksmith, even the new sheriff appointed after his predecessor's arrest as Caldwell's accomplice. "Least we could do," the shopkeeper said gruffly when Zachary thanked him. "Community should have supported you both from the beginning." In the weeks that followed, the homestead was restored and improved with the help of neighbors, who now openly acknowledged their admiration for the couple who had stood against Caldwell's tyranny. The rancher himself awaited trial in Cheyenne, his empire crumbling as more of his crimes came to light. By spring, the land was ready for planting. Zachary and Bethany worked side by side, Samuel watching from a basket in the shade as they prepared the soil for what they hoped would be a bountiful harvest. Thomas's dream for the land lived on through their efforts, honored but no longer a shadow over their growing love. On a warm evening in May, as they sat on their new porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues, Bethany leaned against Zachary's shoulder. "I've been thinking," she said thoughtfully, "about the future." "Oh," he wrapped an arm around her, drawing her closer. "The town needs a school. The children have been without proper education since before I arrived." She looked up at him uncertainly. "I thought perhaps, once Samuel is a bit older, I might teach again. Here in our home at first, then maybe a proper schoolhouse if enough families are interested." Zachary smiled, seeing the passion rekindling in her eyes. "I think that's a fine idea. You were born to teach, just as Thomas believed." She nodded, returning his smile. "And you? What dreams do you have now, Zachary Thornton?" He gazed out over the fields they'd planted together, to the creek that sparkled in the distance, and finally to the small boy sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms. "This," he said simply. "All of this. A home, a family, land that's ours to nurture." He kissed her gently. "And maybe, when Samuel's ready for a brother or sister." Bethany's smile widened. "I'd like that very much." They sat in contented silence as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue sky. The challenges they had faced together, Bethany's collapse in the market, Samuel's early arrival, Caldwell's threats, had forged a bond between them stronger than either could have imagined on that stormy day when a drifting cowboy had carried a pregnant widow home. The homestead that had once seemed a burden too heavy for Bethany to bear alone now thrived under their joint care. And Samuel, the precious link to Bethany's past, was growing strong under the watchful eyes of the mother who had fought to bring him safely into the world, and the man who had chosen to become his father in every way that mattered. As night settled fully over the Wyoming landscape, Zachary led his family inside their home, not just a shelter from the elements, but a sanctuary built on love, sacrifice, and the courage to fight for what mattered most. The path that had brought them together had been unexpected and fraught with danger, but neither would have chosen differently, for it had led them exactly where they were meant to be. 10 years later, the Thornton homestead was nearly unrecognizable from the struggling property Zachary had first encountered. The original cabin had been expanded into a proper house with several rooms, including a classroom where Bethany taught the children of Parowan 3 days a week. The barn housed not just their milk cow but 4 fine horses and various smaller livestock. Fields of wheat and corn stretched toward the horizon, and an orchard of young apple trees promised abundant harvests in years to come. Samuel, now a sturdy 10-year-old with his mother's blue eyes and thoughtful nature, helped his father with chores before racing his 7-year-old sister Abigail to the creek for their daily swimming lesson. Behind them toddled 4-year-old Matthew, determined to keep up with his older siblings despite his shorter legs. From the porch where she rocked 2-month-old Elizabeth, Bethany watched her family with contented pride. The difficult birth of their 4th child had been worlds apart from Samuel's early, frightening arrival attended by both doctor and midwife, surrounded by friends who brought food and assistance in the weeks after. Zachary, noticing his wife's gaze, left his work in the garden to join her. At 42, his face was more weathered, with threads of silver at his temples, but his eyes held the same steady strength that had first captured Bethany's heart. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Thornton," he said, settling beside her. Bethany smiled, adjusting the sleeping infant against her shoulder. "Just counting my blessings. They're too numerous for words." Zachary reached for her free hand, the simple gold band on her finger catching the afternoon light, a replacement for the plain ring he'd fashioned from a silver coin on their wedding day, presented on their 5th anniversary. "You ever think about how it all began?" he asked, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "That day in the market, often," she admitted. "How close I came to losing everything and how instead I found everything I never knew I needed." She leaned toward him, her voice softening. "My protector, my partner, my love." From the creek came the sound of children's laughter, pure, uninhibited joy that echoed across the prosperous land they'd fought so hard to preserve. A legacy not just of property, but of courage, resilience, and the transformative power of love that had turned 2 wounded souls into a family stronger than either could have built alone. Zachary pulled his wife and youngest daughter close, his heart full beyond measure. "Thomas would be proud," he said quietly, "of the land, of Samuel, of you." Bethany nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "And you, Zach, he would be grateful for you." She turned her face up to his. "As am I, every single day." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across their thriving homestead, Zachary Thornton kissed his wife with the same tenderness he'd shown that very first time, a silent reaffirmation of the vow he'd made when he carried her home through the storm. To protect, to cherish, and to love, come what may, for all the days of their lives.